to take a pretty quick turn from neuroscience to talk about two other powerful forces that help explain why the public is behaving the way it is today, both as consumers of media and as the electorate. And by the way, as you all know, the political behavior of the electorate shapes the political behavior of political actors just as surely as media consumption patterns shape the media. I'll treat the first force briefly. It's the intellectual climate that we inherited from the 20th century. It's a climate of profound skepticism. We seem to have lost confidence in our ability to know and communicate about reality. At its extreme, which has been reached often in academia, this means that nobody can decide whether your report of reality is more valid than my report of reality. Your interpretation of a novel or poem is more valid than my interpretation of a novel or poem. Your values, God forbid, your values are better than my values. These ideas, these deeply skeptical ideas, have been presented to generations of students in college and beyond, and have insinuated themselves deeply into the thinking of people who have never heard of either of Werner Heisenberg or Kurt Gödel or Jacques Derrida. It's become commonplace. In fact, it's so commonplace you barely even hear it when people say it anymore. That is, oh, it all depends on your point of view. It all depends on your point of view. Of course, in one sense it does all depend on, but in another sense it doesn't. There are some characterizations of, there are some reports of the way bodies, physical bodies, relate to one another and move that are better than others. If you rely on the wrong one to try to get the moon to the moon and back, if you get a worse one, you're going to fail. In other words, even the most radical skeptics at some level have to acknowledge that some ways of talking about reality are better than other ways of, and yet, in the world that our children have been and their children have been immersed in the academic world, this idea has been eroded deeply. I was on a BBC radio show a while back. A veteran BBC correspondent of about my age and I were being interviewed by two younger BBC journalists. One of the interviewers rather heatedly at some point demanded of the foreign correspondent to know, why do you get to decide what's significant and what's not? Something that all of us who've been in journalism have heard from time to time. He seemed to be struggling a little with that, and so I foolishly decided I would jump in, come to his rescue, and I suggested that a lifetime of making judgments about what will affect history might make you a little better at that than someone who hadn't devoted their lifetime to that task, but had devoted it to other tasks. She was absolutely not persuaded. And she was a journalist. This was a journalist who was talking to us. Is it any wonder, then, that fewer and fewer non-journalists believe that journalists' disciplines might make their reports more reliable than those of others who do not even try to be disciplined?